So I am now pleased to introduce the first executive panel of the morning. And this is entitled, How Career Growth Can Be Part of Employee Experience from the Beginning. Increasingly, we notice that workers want to grow in their jobs. And these leaders will answer questions like, how are companies designing an experience to provide a variety of career paths and development opportunities? And when are the key moments to communicate a company's, oops, just lost it. Sorry about that. What are the most effective new educational techniques, including coaching and mentoring? Moderating this discussion will be anchor and reporter from ABC7, Dan Ashley. Throughout the duration of his career, Dan has received many industry awards, including the prestigious DuPont Columbia Award, 2 Edward R. Murrow Awards for Excellence in Journalism, and numerous Emmy Awards for Best Newscasting and Individual Reporting. His distinguished work is also recognized by many and other industry organizations, including the Associated Press. Dan is a graduate of the University of Northern California with degrees in English and speech communication. So please join me in welcoming Dan Ashley and this panel of leaders to the stage. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. How are you? That doesn't sound very cheerful. Nice to be with you all. How many, you've had one session so far this morning?
I'll do 3.
Well, we hope to have a very lively discussion for you today, and it's a great privilege to be with you today. We have an amazing panel of people. How many of you are from out of town? Just out of curiosity, raise your hands, please. Welcome, great to see you.
A few stragglers.
Don't believe everything you read or see on television. This is a great city. And you're very safe. But pay attention. My name is Dan Ashley. I'm the anchor at ABC7 News for the last 29 years. And it is just a joy to be with you today and to have a discussion about something that I think is vitally important as our world continues to evolve and change. So I'm very pleased to be with you today. And of course, keep in mind, as a TV anchor in my line of work, any chance to be in front of a large group of people who can't change the channel it is a very, very seductive opportunity. We're going to get started here, and I'm going to ask each of our great panelists, and we have one panelist, unfortunately, can't be with us today because they thought they had the flu. As it turns out, they have COVID, but they're doing fine, but they decided not to be here today to keep us all safe. I'm going to ask our panelists to introduce themselves and go down the line and just give a brief description of who they are and from whence they came. And let's start maybe with, let's start at the end of the line, please.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sid Prashar. I am with Google, and currently I lead one of their executive recruiting teams for what we call global functions, which is a few of these CEO directs and helping them with their executive leadership needs across the organization.
Thank you very much. Tim?
Great. Hi, everyone. My name is Tim Davisson. I'm executive consultant and business development director for Stewart Leadership, which is a leadership development consulting firm that's focused on practical application and easy-to-use tools to kind of just solve people problems or prevent people problems at the same time.
Thank you very much. Tim, Elan?
Hi, folks. Pleasure to be with you. My name's Elan Kawesch. I'm the chief product officer and a founding team member at Claira. We're an AI platform that maps the granular abilities of every single person within a firm and then uses that data to match against business needs in real time and build all sorts of tools that help HR leaders and business leaders build better people strategy and optimize their hiring with that data. So pleasure to be with you.
Thank you, Elan. And Joji, please.
Hi, everyone. My name is Joji Gill, and I'm the VP of HR for Applied Materials. I lead their talent and org development and the business partner function. Applied Materials has been in the Valley for a long time, and we make the equipment that make the semiconductors. So there's no semiconductor in this world that's made without our equipment. That's our story.
And she's sticking to it. Thank you all. Give them a big hand, please. Our focus today, as you know, is how career growth can be a part of employee experiences from the very beginning. And I think I'm going to start today with what we were talking about backstage before we came out to join you today. And that is this idea that the workforce is getting younger, priorities are changing, and how can companies meet that challenge, meet that need, both the needs of the company, corporation, and also the needs of the employee, which helps productivity, retention, and general happiness in the workplace. And let's start with this idea of, for a long time, and again, the economy is changing too. Companies had to compete hard for talent and go buy great talent. Now there's a trend to really try to grow talent from within because they found that that is more efficient and it creates a continuity within the company. Why don't we start? Joji, let me start with you on that topic. What are the challenges from your perspective in terms of trying to create talent growth from within to retain employees, identify real leaders, and grow them within the company?
So our industry is very technical, if I can just use a simple word. And the depth of knowledge you need in each field of that technology is fairly deep. And the specializations that you need are very different across the organization. So we end up hiring many different fields of engineering, many fields of science. And our belief has been, Dan, that we think innovation is very important for our work, but it comes from every sphere of our employee. So we spend a lot of time and energy focusing on what does an employee really want. We had made an assumption that we knew what careers employees wanted. What we realized as our demographics have changed that we actually did not understand, and we were making assumptions of what an employee wanted in terms of their career growth. So we focused a lot on enabling our managers as career coaches. So that's a huge focus for us. The other focus is on career conversations that we enable between a manager and employee, because in the end, we think an employee really owns their careers, but we facilitate it for them and we enable it for them through their managers and through the opportunities we provide them in terms of roles that are available, but also in terms of the learning and the development. We have Applied Global University that offers thousands of courses that employees can take. They can go do a master's, they can go do a PhD. So those are some of the things that we are focused on.
Yeah, interesting, Joji. And Sid, let me come with you. I like what Joji said about we believe employees own their careers. For a long time, I certainly being a little bit older, I didn't feel that the company had that attitude. I felt that we were beholden to them more. And I think that has completely changed, and what I see in the workplace constantly is this idea that employees need to be empowered and they need to feel that they are in the driver's seat. Henry Ford famously said, if I can paraphrase, that the person on the assembly line is the employee, the worker is every bit the business person as the owner of the company. And I think, Sid, there's a lot of validity in that in today's marketplace.
It is, and there's also this shift from this mindset of what can I do for the company to what can the company do for me. And this is as true for early career professionals as executives, where they're coming in, but the role they're coming in is just the role they're coming in at. And the conversation already is evolving into what's next for me? How is the company going to support me in whether it's ongoing development, growth, how do I expand my skill sets, how do I do these things that are personal aspirations or interests of mine? So that shift has been subtle but sure, and we're seeing this in our conversations across the board.
Tim, is that absolutely essential to be competitive today as an employer, to recognize the needs of the modern employee?
Oh, absolutely. Just like what Sid said, I think the other thing that that employees that I'm seeing with the clients that we're working with is a real almost more enthusiasm for coaching skills, because I think that's what a lot of, or what we're seeing as a lot of leaders are needing to do is that they're almost like upskilling their coaching abilities so that they can help their employees, in their growth process, as well as identify skills, as well as identify areas that they are able to grow within the organization. I think that's another, another skill of a leader inside of an organization is actually not just putting it all on the employee, but finding opportunities for your employees to grow and expand their skills as well.
Elan, how much of this has changed as a result of the pandemic? How much has that been fueled by the pandemic? And also, what do you anticipate in a changing economy in terms of the sustainability of this model?
Yeah, absolutely. So in the pandemic, we saw this shift from a more traditional model of employee pathwaying and career pathwaying that was very focused on either a top-down approach where the company said, here's what we need within the next year, the next 3 years, or 5 years. How do we find the people within our organization and put them into boxes that they may or may not want to be put into? On the other hand, other firms, more closely to the pandemic, were doing what some of my co-panelists were talking about in terms of letting the employee own their experience, build their own pathway. And Joji made a really important point about fostering conversations between managers and employees. And what we're seeing with the most successful organizations that we're working with is what we're calling this edges-in model approach that takes this hybrid between the top-down and saying, what does the firm need in the next few years, but also taking an ear to what the employee is looking for and making sure that we're having a hybrid between those two things while promoting the best interests of both parties.
Joji, how big a challenge is it as the workforce changes, gets a little younger, baby boomers and older workers begin to move out? How big a challenge is it to identify real stars that are relatively young who can assume leadership roles at a relatively young age and motivate and inspire and manage people even younger than they are? How big a challenge is that to fill the gaps being left by older workers leaving the workforce from a leadership perspective?
It's a huge challenge for our industry, and it's a huge challenge for our company because, again, like I said earlier, the skills we need, the depth of knowledge we need is the real IP. So to really maintain that and build that is a huge challenge. But having said that, I think understanding who these individuals are, and I just want to also state that we've realized that the generational shift is very real, and it's here, that it's not just a concept that's written in case studies. We've actually done a lot of analysis to understand how our the manager demographics are changing, our employee demographics are changing, and however, our leaders are still of one generation. But they are very cognizant of the fact that the younger generation and the different generationals have very different expectations. So I can give a couple of examples. So we do a pretty deep insight into our talent at every level to really understand who are the people, who are the stars. We put them on very, very complicated projects. We test them, we rotate them, and we evaluate them. But we also have these conversations, and we are pretty serious about this last couple of years, and we've received very good feedback on this, that managers as coaches has a skill has to be built so that they can help us identify. And then empowering the employees to have those career conversations also helps us understand. So it's a matching of the two that you have to do. And then you need a whole process on how do you actually track these individuals, how do you grow them, how do you groom them. That's a big part of my responsibility, is to make sure that we understand these employees, but then also we track their careers. And we don't track their careers just for a year or two. We track their careers for the next 5, 10, 20 years, because we're hoping to find our next CEO out of our younger engineers that we've just hired.
Yeah. Tim, let me ask you this question. Discuss, if you can, the challenge of the interface between the younger worker and the older manager, and trying to, there's that old saying, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. How do you teach the older manager to understand the modern necessities of the corporate climate and the needs of the younger employee?
Yeah, it was interesting. We were talking about it backstage about even us as a panelist of when we entered the workforce and how that put almost like an imprint on the way that we actually see the workforce. So, you know, like I consider myself an older millennial, so I started my career in 2008, and we all know what was going on then.
Right.
And I remember how many applications I had to put in and stuff like that. So I think just the process of like where we came in has made a lot of difference about how we see the workforce. But I also think that this is a really great opportunity for us as the younger generation to kind of step up and do some reverse mentoring. Because we do it naturally on how to help boomers turn things into PDFs and the other way around. So I would love to see some more like us like really start to think about what does reverse mentoring look like? Because I don't think it's about upskilling the younger generation. I think it's the other way around.
Yeah, right. You know, that's a fascinating point. Reverse mentoring, that's a great phrase. I know my kids, and even at work sometimes when I ask the inevitable, hey, how do you do this question? I get the boomer, you know, which is funny. Yeah, please go ahead, Sid.
Quick point on that one. I think age is one dimension in the workforce. Yeah. At least in my view, one challenge companies are yet to embrace is this idea of retooling and redeploying their workforce. Yes. Training used to be the big challenge at companies of how do you train, and now with whether it's tech or other companies, there are fewer and fewer clear swim lanes left. So the idea of this redeployment of talent, and in process of that, this retooling of talent, I think this is both a challenge and an opportunity that we're yet to lean into.
Yeah, I think oh, go ahead, Elan.
Jump in.
Yeah, I was just going to mention, you know, and a really interesting thing that we found in some studies on the topic, looking at what employees are looking for in the workforce, is that there really is this age divide at times versus essentially three main groups of employees. Ones that are motivated by the obvious, money and career growth, but a third really important one, which is social interaction. So you asked Dan about the pandemic. We saw this really large shift, especially among younger employees who were saying the most important thing that they were looking for is a social outlet, right? In the age of Zoom, where we're not necessarily going into the office every day, where we can't build the same kind of interpersonal relationships that we used to be able to face-to-face, employees might only get their social needs out in the workforce. And what's really important is, as the co-panelists have said, understanding between a manager and an employee, but also through different age levels within the company, what that motivation looks like, and whether it's just an aspect of building those social bonds instead of just focusing on what are the skills you want to build or how much money you want to make in the future.
Yeah, I think Elan said something very beautiful there, was that we have to understand and know our people. Yeah. So I think that is where I think there's a shift that has happened where it's about thinking about the person and what their career path is and how can you help support that person rather than, oh, this isn't going to be good for business. I think it's about finding three things. It's about finding skills that you're really good at, finding something that you're passionate about, and then also finding something that is a business need. And if you can kind of fit those things, you can kind of do anything, really.
Yeah, which is interesting. And Joji, that really is, for people who started their careers a little earlier, that is a sea change. Absolutely. In terms of the philosophy of what it meant to work and how corporations approach their employees. 180-degree change from how it was 20, 30, 40 years ago, where companies were not worried about meeting the needs of the employee. They were solely interested in how the employee could meet the needs of the corporation.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think it's also, to the point that both Tim and Elan made, it's also about having these conversations with these employees. I was sharing with the panel earlier, in just having some conversation with some of our young talent, what was strikingly interesting was that what was not important to them or top of mind to them was not compensation or career. Those they take as basic needs. But what was important to them was equality issues. What was important to them was race relations. What was important to them was sustainability. What was important to them was connectedness, right? What can they get together and do? So again, really engaging this workforce. We actually have a group called the YPN. We call them the YPN Young Professionals Network. And they're a global organization we engage them in some of our policy decision making.
Really?
We go to them and talk to them and have them do. We had a great big event at our company. It was all hosted, managed by this YPN. So engaging them now will really help steer companies on what is important for them, because without them, we're not a company.
Anyone else want to chime in on that, or should we move forward?
No, I was just thinking that, as we were talking about backstage, is that there's a whole shift in the way that what we're asking leaders to do.
Yep.
There's kind of been a loss over the last couple of years that organizations are now the stewards of our culture, and they're standing up for basic human rights when our religion and government have broken down. So it's now a time for us to actually have to train leaders to do three things. It's about making sure that they're the stewards of the organization, starting to think about the long-term and short-term revenue of the organization, starting to think about the people inside of the organization. What is diversity? What is from vendor to first day on the job? And then also being a steward of the earth and thinking through our supply chains and thinking through that. So we're asking leaders to be stewards of our culture, not just the business anymore.
Yeah, it's a great point, Tim, and Sid, maybe I'll come to you, and then anyone else can chime in. But I think what younger employees or modern employees are looking for, all of the things we just discussed, make it an absolute necessity that corporations meet those needs, and it's sort of now considered bad form for a company to put profits first. It's an unattractive quality. They are expected to be part of the community, part of the solutions to some of the major problems.
Yeah.
Where we used to rely, as you said, Tim, on the government to do that, we expect corporations to be involved in these problems.
A couple of interesting themes there, right? Leaders no longer have the luxury of choice. You don't get to choose between one of them or a few of them. You really now have to and are challenged to harmonize them. And it's more a question of to what degree is your organizational culture expecting that, your board is expecting that of you. We used to learn in business schools about profit maximization as the goal of the enterprise. That is no longer the case. All these different stakeholders have to be optimized and harmonized and balanced. You don't have the picking and choosing luxury anymore.
Yeah, making money is not only the sole goal anymore.
It is something you do in the process of not doing harm.
Right.
And how much good you do is really where you optimize.
Yeah.
And if I can just add one thing, I think if I were to simplify this, right, it's really about having an employee base that you truly understand, that you truly engage, that you truly motivate, which then results in productivity, higher engagement, higher innovation for us, right? And high results.
Yeah.
So it's almost, you've almost reversed the whole dialogue about what's your starting point.
Yeah.
Right?
Years ago, there was stigma attached to moving around a lot. Mm-hmm. If you looked at someone's resume and said, well, I see you worked here for 2 years, here for a year, here for 3 years, that was a red flag. Mm-hmm. Not anymore. It's almost a red flag if you stayed too long, right? My son tells me all the time, well, I've been here 5 years, I got to move. I'm like, well, it's going so well, why would you move? But that's a different way of thinking. But, and he really has this itch to move along for no other reason than he feels it looks bad that he stayed in one place for so long. How challenging is that for your industries to continue to grow an employee, to retain them, to identify those rock stars and those leaders in a climate where they want to move all the time? And granted, if the economy changes, that metric may change as well. But how challenging is that to retain employees when the instinct is to move on?
I can grab that one. Yeah, so I mean, the really successful companies we're working with are moving to a competency-based approach. They're saying, instead of what are the nice names on the resume that someone might have, or how long did they stay there, and is that an indicator of loyalty? Instead, they're saying, how do we build almost an internal gig economy based on competencies and abilities that just match what we need. And if we focus and zero in on only what we need now, what we need in the next few years, and not so much about what it says on a piece of paper related to where someone went to school, what companies they might have worked at, what courses they might have taken, just for the sake of taking the course, that they're winning. And one really interesting anecdote about this, I was talking to the head of HR at a really major candy manufacturer the other day, who said to me a couple things. First off, that she wouldn't send me free samples, which was really upsetting. But secondly, that they're taking the entirety of the front line of their factory workers, and that's across many, many roles, and bringing that into one role that focuses only on what people can do and building pathways between where they are now and what role they are and into this single unified role. And by building this more agile workforce that's only based on what people can do, based on their competencies, and instead of where they might have bounced around, they've had success in hiring because there's this lack of unconscious bias that's coming as a process of reading through resumes that they're finding success with this more focused approach.
That's interesting. Anyone else want to comment on that?
I'll just add a quick thing up there. I think there is the change, the shift that's happening of, yes, job hoppiness is not as big of a flag anymore, but there's still a cultural hurdle there. When we're talking to leaders about bringing a new leader in, folks still fixate on, oh, but they've been in this job for so long. Were they not motivated? Were they not good enough where they had other options? And so you really have to bring the conversation back to impact. And there comes the importance of storytelling. We were talking about that in a different context. You have to be able to tell the story of what you've done and why you've done it. And the cohesiveness of that message has to come across. Because people still get stuck on, oh, 5 jobs in 6 years, something must be wrong.
Right, interesting. How important is formal education today? Do you have to have a 4-year degree? Do you have to have a master's degree? How critical is that in the hiring process when you identify great candidates?
I can take that.
Yeah,
one.
please.
I think for some roles, education is very important because part of the knowledge that you gain during your education is really important, and it kind of goes back to the competency that you're looking for. But for some jobs, it's not. We're also thinking of re-engineering some roles where our dependence on the degreed individual is not as high, right? So I think companies are experimenting a lot with who they can bring, because I think in addition to skills, competencies, your attitudes, your winning attitude, your ability to adapt into the culture, some of those things take a lot more precedence sometimes.
Anyone want to?
I can speak for Google. We've learned along the way. In the beginning years, we used to focus on what college someone went to and go after top talent at those colleges. Then we looked at data, and we found little to no correlation between where someone went to school and their performance on the job.
Right.
And so we shifted away from that, where some roles will always, the ones that are highly technical, will require advanced degrees and deep education. But a large majority of roles now don't require 4-year degrees. Work experience can supplant for that.
You can either do the job or you can't.
Exactly. And we've taken it one step further, right? Because not everyone has the same access to 4-year degrees. Not all 4-year degrees are the same. And so what Google's done more recently, at least, is come up with these certifications that are helping folks get more employable, high-growth, high-need skills. And we are now using those certifications as an alternative to 4-year degrees as well.
Interesting, very interesting. Tim, let me come to you with this one. When interviewing employees, potential new employees, what are the tangible things that employee is looking for today, and what the company needs to be telling that employee about the opportunities for growth? Is it, just to make up something, is it we will pay for an advanced degree if you want to pursue your education further? Is it we offer childcare? What are the things that employees expect to hear from companies in a very tangible way about how they're going to be treated and what growth opportunities they'll be presented with?
Great question, and I don't have the answer because I think that it is the responsibility of the hiring manager to find out what the motivations and needs of that individual are, and then figure out how to do it in a human way.
Right.
I think that's the future, is trying to figure out how, we all lived through a pandemic, or we're still living through it, but then we all jump back into work the exact same way.
Yeah.
So, and
right.
It feels
almost like it didn't happen.
Yeah, and it hurts.
Yeah.
And it hurts our soul. And I think the way of kind of tooling that is that we all have the individual responsibility to look at each person in front of us as a human and figure out how to help that human become their own happiness.
You know, on that point, Tim, I took note when, during the pandemic, our general manager, who's a great guy, and our news director is a wonderful woman who they're very much now engaged in the business of how to meet the needs of employees. Where in certainly television news, that did not happen for a long time. That was not the concern. And during the pandemic, I worked from the station. I never worked from home. I told them from the beginning, I'll stay there. Everybody else worked from home, and there were times where there was 2 or 3 people in the entire building. You know, nobody was working there. Everybody was at home, and when it came time to come back, and I know you all experienced this, my boss said something that really struck me. He put out a note, and then we had a meeting and said, look, lives have changed the last 3 years. We understand it's a big adjustment now for people to come back to the office and re-engage with one another. And it was a fascinating point that really brought home to me how the workforce had changed and how managers had to change to meet those needs. Of course, my big adjustment was, because I'd been alone, the station was so quiet, my adjustment was, what are all these people doing in my TV station? When they, because it was a big change for me. But anyone want to field that question about this idea that that the pandemic really has accelerated changes that were already in place. Societal changes.
Absolutely.
We still have a long way to go, but we've become a much more equity-based, inclusive society and corporate society. That needs to continue, obviously. But the pandemic also accelerated a lot of this.
Absolutely.
In many ways.
Absolutely. I can go first. I actually call COVID the social experiment. Because I really think it's really tested many aspects of our society. It's tested who we are as a human race, and it's shown us many aspects of where we were resilient and where we could have been different. But I think it's impacted the corporate world in a very significant way, and I think it's still a debate of what's effective. There are articles almost every day. I read one in Fortune last week. I read one in New York Times yesterday. There's a huge debate of what's the ideal model. And I don't think there's an ideal model because our economies are so different. The jobs, all this AI focus that we're going to have, do we really need people in offices or not is going to be a debate for a while to come. We've taken a stand as a company that we've always offered flexibility, and we will continue to be flexible. We've offered our employees a whole plethora of options that they can work, whether remote, whether they're on-site. I was like you. I went into the office. There was nobody, but I just found peace and quiet, so I like to work there. But an interesting data point that I do want to share, we just finished our employee survey that we did. And we actually looked at data about where we have the highest engagement scores. And we have 3 indexes that we kind of gauge. All 3 indexes, the highest scoring was employees that were on site. And the lowest scoring was employees that were not. We've given them the flexibility. But it also goes back to what you said. People want to connect.
You're saying, Joji, they were happier
They're happier at work, on site. And the lowest scores were on when they were remote. So that also kind of is helping us understand that people do want to connect. They do miss the camaraderie. They do miss the connection. So again, I call it the social experiment. I think we still have to see where this is going to settle down.
But Elan, we're not going backwards.
Absolutely not. No, absolutely not. And what's really interesting, Joji, slightly tangentially, that is an important point that you made, is really treating this process in terms of understanding employees and their social needs almost more like a marketing or product organization than an HR organization. Going and building that persona of what a happy employee and a successful employee looks like, what also a not happy and unsuccessful employee looks like, and really zeroing in on what you're learning through those surveys, through that persona building process, and understanding how can we, Dan, as you said, continue to move forward and continuously adjust and learn and be okay with failing and trying new things, but definitely not moving backwards and saying, we're just going to use the old strategy and hope that it wins.
Absolutely.
Tim, on something that Elan just said, when you identify what makes a happy employee and what makes an unhappy employee, what are the efforts that need to be made to identify the unhappy employee and try to turn them into a happy employee? Is that possible? Is that something a company should be trying to do? Or do they just need to move that person on?
Yeah, I don't know. Again, I don't know. I'm sorry. I'm the best panelist on here. Every answer is like,
not at all. I'm just throwing
hard questions.
I mean, I'll tell you a little bit of like a little story of myself. Is like I was one of those people that made the transition actually right after 2020. So like in 2019, actually late 2018, I ended up having a stroke from being that person that was just go, 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 working at one of the top consulting companies in the world, and just realizing that I disconnected my body and my mind.
Right. And you're a young person. That must have been a lot of stress to go.
Yeah. I mean, it was a lot. But what it did is that I think, I was talking with one of my colleagues this morning, is that there's some of these like unexpected positive consequences of COVID. Yeah. And I think if you have an unhappy employee, I think it's a reflection upon asking them what's going on with them and understanding who they are as a human and trying to help them either coach them up or coach them out.
Coach them up or coach them out. Let's talk just for a moment, Sid, about the idea of creating talent pools in the company and outside the company. I know we do a lot of outreach at universities and create partnerships to try to find young talent. What's going on in that world?
I think that still applies as much. What's important is the intentionality and the purposefulness of it. So is the talent network for improving access? Is the talent network for creating a community, or is it for affinity groups? I think there's still very much a value to be had out of these talent groups. And these can be both inside and outside the company. There's another lens on it, which is now people are starting to look at Black plus talent groups, Latinx talent groups. So there's demographic aspects of how you think about these different groups, and needs for each of them may be different. How each of these different employee segments look at job satisfaction is different. Their needs are more nuanced in today's context. So what is the purpose of it and how you are serving each one of them? I think you have to take an all-up approach versus just cherry pick a certain group across the org. Depends on the makeup of the org and the workforce.
Sure, as well. And what you're looking.
And that's a hard skill. I mean, if we're asking our leaders to do that even above and beyond. So it's like, how do we do this in a sustainable way, but then also don't leave marginalized communities behind who are generally been the ones who haven't received this type of development?
It's a lot more responsibility for today's corporate leaders. Before it was just make money, stay out of trouble, keep things, but now you have to manage human resources and community commitment and social issues in a much different way than they used to. I would imagine it makes it even harder to find really top-notch leaders who can do all of those things. Fair statement?
Absolutely.
But I imagine those people can write their own ticket, because that's a unicorn, isn't it? Yep. The kind of person that can manage all of the responsibilities today. Let's talk quickly about mentorship. You mentioned reverse mentorship, Tim, but how important is creating and finding allies, identifying those people who are allies and mentors to help employees grow within the organization? Elan, I'll start with you.
Yeah, it's absolutely crucial, because the only thing that one of the things that you can't learn in a more generic course is institutional knowledge, right? You cannot go on Coursera and LinkedIn and learn how something works specifically within your company, right? That's only going to come from within, whether that's through documentation or, more importantly, building these connections through mentorship. And what Tim's comment really is making me think is that we should go look for leaders who have PhDs in psychology instead of an MBA, right? Because to be able to do that mentorship effectively and teach that institutional knowledge, in addition to all the other leadership skills that you need in terms of the business, is maybe almost going to only come from a social worker who's going to build that mentorship relationship.
There's a certain amount of emotional intelligence that skill requires. Before we run out of time, I'd like to go down the line and let each of you take just a few seconds to kind of summarize your thoughts on this idea of helping employees grow from within. Let's start with you, Sid.
My closing comments would be, this really is about adapting. There is no one playbook today. There is no one path to success today. And so adaptability becomes really the key. coupled with curiosity. You mentioned the point about leadership. We disqualify more leaders in our conversations for leadership traits and EQ versus just the IQ or the role-related knowledge aspects of the job. So it really is about not just looking for the here and now, but looking for leaders and individuals that are going to grow with you and adapt with you, regardless of which direction the organization takes, the context takes.
Okay, excellent. Tim?
Yeah, I would have to say it's about heart and human. It's about leading through your heart and recognizing that that person on the other side of that Zoom call or the other is as a human. And I think we have kind of lost that over the last couple of years, and I think there's this like rejuvenation of like remembering that we are all humans in front of each other, and that we just have to give each other some grace.
And I think we did that instinctively during the pandemic, at least in the early days. We were all in this together, and there was a sense of community.
Yeah.
And then you get back to normal, and it's sometimes harder to retain, I think. Elan?
Yeah, for me, it's very similar to Tim. It's about building that model where leaders and also colleagues are saying, how can I help? Right? Just opening your ear and saying, how can I build a model of service within my organization that really focuses on how can I help the other more so than I can help myself, and thus how can I help myself by helping others. So making that focus a culture in your organization is probably a big takeaway that I have from this.
Yeah, excellent.
And then I just want to say that I think having a workforce that you're really focused on developing is a business imperative. I think there's no choice there. The other thing I would say is don't assume that somebody wants to grow their career a certain way. Asking is really important. And then the last thing I think that's really important is if you're a leader or a manager, be a coach. Leaders as coaches can be very effective.
Be a coach.
Be a coach.
I like that. Ladies and gentlemen, please, Joji Gill, Sid Prashar, Elan Kawesch, and Tim Davisson. Give them a big hand.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great pleasure to be with you. Thank you for engaging in this discussion with us, and enjoy the rest of this conference. Thank you so much.